Hey tarot friends, it's Dustin from Modern Metaphysicae, and today I thought we could hang out and take a trip through the Jean Dodal Tarot by Artisan Tarot. By the time this video gets posted, and while you're watching it right now, the Kickstarter for this deck should be live, and I will be sure to include a link down in the description box below where you can go and find out more information about this deck and even back it on Kickstarter. As always, down there you'll also find links to my social media where you can reach out and connect, as well as a link to my personal website where you can book a tarot reading or even purchase some of my own handmade metaphysical goods. So be sure to check all that out at the end of the video. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe the video because it really does help the community to grow. So let's dive into this. Our friends over at Artisan Tarot kindly enough sent us another deck to review, and I just have to say thank you so much because I love getting these review decks and checking them out and providing feedback. It's just really enjoyable, and the folks over at Artisan Tarot are just absolutely wonderful to chat with. This is the third deck now that I will have received from them. The first two were the Jean Dodal and the Nicholas Conver. I will put links to these two decks up here in the cards, so if you're interested in checking out their other decks, be sure to do that. And yeah, let's dive into this. So this deck is one of my favorite historical decks. The Dodal Tarot was one of the first sort of historical decks that really sucked me in back in, I think it was like 2008, 2009, and specifically because of the Fleur Noir edition that was released. I have a number of different editions of the Dodal now, including the Fleur Noir, the Cartogram, and the Tarot Sheet Revival edition. We'll look at some of those editions alongside this one later in the video. So before we do that, let's dive into the box. You get all of their decks in just a really nice, well-designed tuck box. It's nothing crazy, but I really do like the attention to detail that they include on their boxes, specifically the use of the card back design and the flower motif that changes with each deck and matches the deck itself, which is just really clever, and I love it. Inside, you'll find your deck of cards. And just as a standard disclaimer, right, this is a review copy of the deck. So this version of the deck will have some changes and alterations by the time it reaches your hands if you do decide to purchase it or back it on Kickstarter. So definitely keep that in mind. There are some things I know that will already be changed, and one of those is the card back design. So this little black border will not be on the final version of the deck. I think Justin Michael confirmed that for me, if I remember correctly. And that's just one of, I'm sure, a number of changes they will make from this version to the one that gets sent out at the end of the Kickstarter. So keep that in mind. But as always, they have the historical back design, which is really lovely. The cardstock is amazing. It's always on this really just buttery, beautiful linen cardstock. This deck is a standard tarot size, so you can see it's pretty standard. I think it's ever so slightly smaller. Yeah, it's ever so slightly shorter, but it's pretty standard. And yeah, the cardstock's fantastic. I really enjoy this cardstock. It's meant to be shuffled, it's meant to be used, it's meant to stand up to the test of time. And that's the thing about Artisan Tarot decks that I really appreciate, is that these are meant to be used. And that's why I love getting their decks, is because I have a number of historical decks that are very collectible, and I'm always a little apprehensive in using them too often because I don't want to hurt them. But these, they're affordable, they're incredibly well produced, the quality is exceptional, and they are designed to be shuffled and beat up and loved, which I simply adore. So let's take a trip through the Jean Dodal Tarot by Artisan Tarot, and we'll come back and we'll take a look at this alongside some other versions and talk about what I like, what I don't like, and yeah, this is the Jean Dodal Tarot by Artisan Tarot. So that was the Jean Dodal Tarot by Artisan Tarot. It is an exceptionally beautiful and well done restoration of this historic tarot deck that is one of the oldest, and that certainly had a heavy influence on the decks that followed. Now we're going to kind of take a look at this in comparison to a couple of the other editions of this deck that I have. So the one on the right here is the Jean-Claude Flournoy deck, and this is probably the one that has been most prolifically available for some time now. The one on the left is the one from Cartogram. It is, I'm not sure if this is still in print at the time of filming this, but it's a really lovely facsimile edition. Like I mentioned earlier in the video, I do also have the Tarot Sheet Revival version of the facsimile, which is equally as lovely, but alas, we only have so much room on camera here. So yeah, those are the different versions we're going to look at alongside this. So the Artisan Tarot version, I think, does a really exceptionally good job of just really kind of cleaning things up. The one thing about Jean-Claude Flournoy's decks that I do love is that they maintain some of the line variation that is on a lot of these cards historically, specifically because, you know, these were woodblock printed, which means someone was hand carving the images, and so the sort of perfect straight lines is not something you're going to see in historical decks, right? They're going to have line variation. There's going to be skips where the ink didn't quite get in to the surface of the wood block. There's also going to be much more noticeable, like thick to thin sort of things. Now, the goal behind Artisan Tarot is always to just really clean things up and move towards a very modern take on the deck. Their coloration in this version of the deck is really great. It does hold pretty much true to the original coloration, which I really appreciate. You still have that really deep blue. You have a lovely yellow. You have a nice green. You have that sort of pink, the flesh tone, and the reds. I will say that the red in this printing of the deck for me is a little too warm. If you look at the historical versions of the deck, or even the Flournoy, the reds are a little bit more towards the purple side of the spectrum, but it's still nice and it still works. You'll see also that the team over at Artisan Tarot has taken time to go through and just kind of clean up the line work, right? Where we have this kind of cat here who isn't finished. You know, they've finished them down here on the bottom left. You can see where they've added the line for, you know, his little butt cheek there, which is missing in the original and in the Flournoy, and other kind of things like that. You'll also see that they've colored the fool's face with the flesh tone, etc. Now, I will say that in the fool here, the leggings and then the flesh tone are a little confusing to me. Again, this isn't traditional in terms of how the clothing would have been worn. In this sense, you can see that, you know, he's got basically like linen breeches on with a colored thing underneath, and in this one they chose to have it basically his legs be naked underneath. It's really sort of an aesthetic choice, and I don't think there's a right or wrong here, but I still think I prefer the version that has the alternating colors and the sense of layers of clothing, because that's just more historically accurate. But nonetheless, they do a really good job of cleaning up all of the line work. So yeah, our magician here, same sorts of things, right? You see going on. The thing that I really appreciate about the folks at Artisan Tarot is that their goal is always to make the cards more readable, right? And in that sense, they choose the way they color things and what lines to kind of keep or remove in an effort to sort of modernize the image to what we expect, you know, in today's sense, without losing that like historical feel and context, which I think is really cool. So they do a really great job. You can see here in the Papes card where they've done some different choices in that to kind of make it a little bit more readable in how they've colored her robes, right? So there's a lot of different sort of colors going on in the facsimile version that can be a little confusing, where, you know, you have like this flesh tone and you have the blue over here, and you know, you can see it reflected in Fleur Noir's where it's just cleaned up, but here they've kind of rebalanced how some of those colorations were made, and it does kind of make it feel a little bit more balanced. You get a greater sense of depth in her robes, which I really like, and it does offer, you know, a little bit more visibility and understanding of what's going on in the card without all of the sort of noise of the color, which is cool. Our Empress, they always do just a fantastic job of catching the expressions, which I love. You know, I talk about this in every historical deck video that I make, but the faces are really one thing that I adore about Tarot de Marseille. Again, here in our Emperor card, I do wish that the leggings of our Emperor had the alternating colors. This again was a sign of wealth, you know, that you could afford having someone make leggings that were from different fabrics and things like that. And oftentimes you would see someone have, you know, the alternating set and things like that, which was, you know, it was a sign of wealth and of frivolity, really, at the end of the day in that period. I do also think that the button panel here, choosing to make it all red, does kind of flatten that a little bit. So I think, you know, this could have done with a different color, but, you know, it's all subjective, really. Our Pope, which is just really well done. You can see now, you can see that throughout a lot of the majors, they've chosen to add the flesh tone to the faces. I think it's important to point out that in the original deck and in the Fleur Noir, that the faces are basically paper toned in a lot of the cards. It doesn't really bother me to have them flesh toned, but at the same time, it is a little different. It's a choice. And also the inclusion of coloring the beard blue, as well as the sort of fabric pieces that come off of his papal tiara. So some noticeable changes for sure. Our Lovers card, this is one of them that I noticed the most, and it's something that's bothered me in this deck for a long time, and that is the laurel wreaths. So the whole idea here, in my mind, and historically when we look at art history depictions of this, oftentimes you would see a woman with flowers in her hair and a woman with a laurel wreath. And the idea behind this is that the lover is having to choose basically whether to marry for wealth or beauty, right? So the woman who has the laurels in her hair, right, represents, and you can see she's kind of got a pointy nose and she's not the most attractive, but she's wealthy, right? She probably comes from a very well-off family and the like. So, you know, he's picking between, do I marry for beauty and love, or do I marry for wealth and fortune and fame, right? And you can see in the historical version of the deck in the facsimile here that the laurels aren't even colored. But for whatever reason, Fleur Noir decided to make this bottom section red, and it drives me nuts. It kind of make her look like she has like a mohawk with a headband. And here, Artisan Tarot is chosen to make them green. I would love to just see this as a laurel wreath, right? Representing that whole idea that she, she's the wealthy one and she's the beautiful one, and that he has to make that choice, because that's really what this card is about. So, yeah, I still don't know why this choice was made in Fleur Noir's in terms of coloration. You can see that the coloration of the outfits has been changed a little bit, which is nice. I do really like that the angel wings were made solid blue, and it really kind of unifies that. Also, the green being carried through the background is a really cool choice as well. We have our chariot. Love the horses in this deck. There's so much character in those little eyes. I will say with the chariot, you'll see that they've chosen to put the green or the darker sort of posts for the canopy on the outside instead of the inside. The reason why I think historically the historical deck creators put the darker color on the inside was to force perspective, so it pushes those darker pillars back, so you get that sense of depth within the chariot. So I would love to see those reversed. Again, it's one of those old art history tricks, even when you're painting today, right? Light colors come to the front and dark colors come to the back, which is why it's really difficult to paint someone, for example, behind like a bright orange backdrop, because that bright orange is just going to come forward no matter what you do, even though it's supposed to be in the background of a painting. For example, if you're painting a portrait of someone sitting in front of like an orange curtain, right? That orange curtain is going to come forward because it's just such a bright and vibrant color. So it's just a little art history thing that I think is important here and should be fixed. That being said, too, the inclusion of the curtain going out, I don't know what that would quite be attached to going that far. You get the sense that this little thing is kind of in the background, and that maybe there should be another one over here. But it's one of those really subjective things. We don't really know, right? There's not like a ton of documentation on why the card makers made these choices. It's all subjective, and my opinions are solely based on sort of the art history research that I've done. So Justice is beautifully done. I really do like the coloration choices in her robes in this version. I think it's really fantastic. I do specifically really like that they chose to use the dark blue in her headdress as opposed to the light blue, like Fleur Noir did. The Hermit, really well done again. I love the Hermit in this deck. He just looks so like grandfatherly. I also do really think that they chose the right eyebrow for him. In this one, you can see he kind of has a quizzical expression, whereas in this one he has kind of a contemplative expression, and I like this one personally better. Our Wheel of Fortune is really, really great. I love the expressions. They're the best. The one thing that did strike me as a little odd with this one is the choice to put the flesh tone down here behind the tail. Now, again, I think this is kind of a perspective thing, right? Like this peg is supposed to be coming off of this sort of stand that the wheel is on. So I'm not sure why they chose to color that differently. In fact, I think I would venture to say that this line that you see on here is probably just an error, and they just didn't want to recut the entire print block, because oftentimes these print blocks were not, they're not carving just one little print block, right? When you see these historical print blocks, and there's some in museums, and you can find pictures online. If I find one, I'll post one up here. But they're big, massive blocks of wood where they would carve multiple cards onto the block. because it was much easier to print that way. So I think it was probably just a mistake and they didn't want to recarve the whole thing, so they just left it there. That's my theory, at least. Our strength card, which is actually one of my favorites because it's supposed to be a bear. Jean-Claude Flournoy, I think, is the first person I read that mentioned that, and I think that was in the book that comes with his restoration of it. But I just love the idea that it's a bear in this deck, as opposed to a lion, although it still looks very lion-like. So yeah, really great choices on the coloration on this one, I think. I don't like the red lips on this one. That's always kind of bothered me. I'm like, why does the creature have lipstick on? But yeah, I think they did a fantastic job here. Our Hanged Man, again, I would really like to see the alternating pant colors here, because again, that is a symbol of wealth. And the thing that is interesting about this is that our Hanged Man is a wealthy man, right? So it adds this whole other layer to the story behind this card. Also, the choice to make the trees yellow is really interesting to me. I don't know why they chose yellow as opposed to green, because it's very clearly green in the facsimile version of the deck. So it works yellow, and it does give some contrast to the card, but I don't know, I still kind of like the green better. I love his face, and I love that they chose to make his tongue red. That actually really makes me happy. Our death card, really well done. Obviously, you know, the historic version of this card that we have access to is really really beat up. Again, we have some different choices here on our death skeleton. Again, I think the choice to put blue on the backside of his shoulder there is, again, to force perspective. That's why a lot of those colors were chosen in that way. So it would be cool to see that kind of maintained. The whole idea there being, you know, the shading in some regard. Our Temperance card, again, really well done. I think that the choice to make her bodice piece blue is a really good one, because I don't think this is intended to represent her nude, because obviously a lot of the skin in this version of the deck is just left uncolored, and so I think this may have been a lighter red initially, depending on the pigment that was used in it. You know, I would actually be curious to see if there's been any pigment analysis done on these cards, but this is likely a really faded out color, and it might have just been a color that has faded and been lost to time over the years. But really, really well done. I love the inclusion of the gold across the bottom of her robes. Our Devil, I will say that I did notice right off that their nipples weren't red, which is kind of an odd thing to notice, but I noticed it. And I think that the reason why they did this in the historical version of the deck was to emphasize the sort of lustful aspect of this card. But yeah, it's one of those things that has always just been like, that's an interesting thing. Yeah. Our Tower, great Tower card. Really, really great choices here. The removal of the pond is interesting. I did notice that. But overall, really good. Our Star, really lovely job on the Star card. Our Moon. I love his little red arms, so I'm really glad they chose to keep that. Our Sun. So here this is interesting to me that they chose to adjust the face and the body tone. I'm pretty sure these figures are supposed to be represented as basically just wearing the cloth over their bits. So I'm not sure why we chose the different colors here. It kind of feels like they're in like skin tight like leotards now, which is kind of strange to me. Again, here we have the different colors. So there really isn't a consistency to whether or not we're choosing to leave faces a certain color or not. I love it. Always makes me laugh that they kept the yellow here, but again, that was obviously an error in the coloration of the card, whether they were doing color printing or if they were doing it with stencils. I'm not sure specifically off the top of my head. I am sad to see that they did not include the stamp here on the world card. I love that the plant was colored green. That actually made me smile. But really good job. And then we go into our minors. The minors are pretty straightforward. Again, you can see that the green here is much more vibrant than our other versions. This probably isn't a green that you would see a lot historically just because it is so vibrant, but that's okay. But you can see that they have stayed very true to the historical coloration of the deck, which I really appreciate and love. Let's skip to some of the quartz here so we can take a look at those. So again, you know, really good choices. Really well cleaned up and defined. This specific valet or page has always made me laugh because it looks like he has two arms coming out of his right shoulder, which is just like this really weird perspective thing that I think they just couldn't figure out. So it's always made me laugh. And it just feels extra noticeable in the restorations that it does in the historical version. The horse in this is always kind of interesting. But the quartz overall, they did an excellent job with. There wasn't really anything that stood out to me on the quartz. Let's take a look at our two of coins, because that's kind of a big one. Now here, this is one thing that I think maybe Fleur Noir did better. I don't think that the coloration here was blue on this sort of like a border. I think this is just a product of not coloring intentionally there. So I think it was probably more intended to look like this than like this when the deck was new. I do think, however, that the blue here that you see kind of stained out, which I think is probably due to water damage, just the way the pigment looks like it's moved on this card, was probably closer to this. But it's still really hard to tell where that blue pigment is coming from. So I still think this works, but woodblock printing and coloring in this kind of a way would have been just really challenging for them in the period. So, but this is probably one of the hardest cards to interpret because of the obvious water damage to the card. Threes. Let's jump ahead to our Two of Cups, last but not least, because that's usually one that people are interested in checking out. And there was quite the discussion on one of the Facebook groups, I can't remember which now, because I have slept since then, where they were talking about the different sort of name conventions that we see. So here in the two, you see Dodali, and then here we have Dodal, right? Now, in this period, there's a few things to remember when it comes to, where's my Two of Cups in this one? Oh, there it is. There's a few things to remember when you're talking about writing. One thing to remember and keep in mind is that spelling of names, and spelling just in general, was not standardized. It just wasn't. You can see a perfect example of this in the first folio of William Shakespeare, where you have different letters being replaced with different things, because a lot of times when you were having something printed and you only had a set of letters, you would run out of certain really common letters. For example, like the letter S. A lot of times you'll see in old documents the letters S and F used interchangeably, as well as the letters U, N, and V used interchangeably to represent one another, right? So that's also one thing to keep in mind. Two, there seems to be some research done. I haven't done this research and I can't remember where I read this now, but the thought is between the name changes that Dodali here was an attempt to Italianize his name for the reason of marketing this deck in Italy or exporting it to Italy. I'm not sure what the academic sort of validity behind that is or not. It is something that I have jotted down to research further myself, because it is fascinating to think about that. But here you see just Dodal. You also see this little symbol at the end, and this often was used in different engraving, etching, and book plates to basically use space. So when you're engraving or you're etching something, a lot of times you don't quite center justify things, right? Because you're carving them by hand. And so if you didn't quite do that correctly, a lot of times you would add these sort of like little flourish characters, or sort of, dingbats, basically, which is where we get the whole font wingdings from. There's a whole history lesson there to go into, but they would add these to sort of fill the space, or to replace certain vowels and things like that. So this could intentionally be there to replace the I, or it could simply be there to fill the space, because obviously, if that wasn't there, the name is shifted and justified all the way to the left, where Jean is not. You also see here that the I in Jean, or the J, I should say, is represented by an I. Again, this is a very common thing in the period to use those different letters interchangeably, because of the sort of typesetting standards of the day. So not uncommon at all to kind of see that. Yeah, so that's what I wanted to touch on there. There's a whole history lesson to go over there. I don't want to delve too deeply into it. If you're interested in it, let me know in the comments down below. Maybe we can make a separate video about that. So yeah, that's the Jean Dodal Tarot by Artisan Tarot. I think it's really great. I think it's one of their best restorations yet. You can definitely tell that they're really thinking about things, and they're diving into the history more and researching things really well, which I really appreciate. Again, I love how usable these decks are. It shuffles like a dream. It's just so buttery smooth and lovely, and the cardstock is amazing. So definitely check this one out if you're interested in historical Marseille decks. Their Kickstarter should be live, and there is a link to that down in the description box below. As always, thank you so much for coming to hang out with me today to check out this new version of the Dodal, and I hope all of you have an amazing day. And remember, everyone is fighting a battle that you know nothing about. So be kind, always. Bye, everybody.